All right, good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock on Wednesday. That means it's time for the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar. I'm Matt Helmers at Iowa State University and fortunate to be part of the Iowa Learning Farms here at Iowa State University. Iowa Learning Farms is a partnership of the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Iowa DNR, ISU Extension and Outreach, with many other partners throughout the state. Um, Always fortunate to get to moderate the webinar. As I was telling our speaker, this is certainly consistently my favorite hour of the week to get to moderate the webinars. And so today we're really fortunate to have with us Dr. Derek Franklin. Derek is a postdoctoral research associate here at Iowa State University. And Dr. Franklin is going to talk to us about more than a practice, sense of place and stewardship among prairie strip adopters. So certainly a topic near and dear to me, being involved with the Prairie Strips project since the start. And I think that as we think about the implementation of conservation practices in the future, thinking about that sense of place and stewardship can really benefit all of us. So with that, Dr. Franklin, the virtual floor is all yours. And if, as always, if folks have questions or comments, please type those in the chat box and we'll get those to Dr. Franklin at the end of his talk. Now the virtual floor really is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for having me on, everybody. I meant to ask Matt for a laugh track because I will say jokes, and now they're usually met with silence, but anyway, but now
So,
it's
so
still
I have to work as a moderator today during it.
yeah,
So
I need a
no,
laugh.
nobody needs to hear my
Play
laugh.
the laugh track. Okay, cool. Well, so yeah, we'll jump right in here. And so thank you so much for, as I mentioned, Derek Franklin, a postdoc here at Iowa State University. And today I'll be reporting out on some of the findings from interviews I did for my dissertation with farmers and landowners who have adopted and maintained prairie strips in Iowa and Minnesota for at least 3 years. So a couple terms I'm going to be throwing around today are landowners. These are people who don't farm, but they do own farmland. Maybe they're a retired farmer or a spouse of a farmer, or children of a farmer. And then also be talking to operating farmers, people who, and in this case, individuals who both own and operate their farm here in Iowa or Minnesota for this population. Also, some quick photo credit. All of the wonderful pictures that you see, if it's a pretty picture, was taken by Omar Decock Mercado as part of the Strips project. So and I'll get the sense of place. I'll give you a little primer on that here in a little bit. But first thing, I wanted to just kind of really make sure we're all understanding the context. Midwest agriculture is an incredibly productive region, and in part large, it's got incredibly fertile soils and a great climate for growing crops. And 75% of the nation's corn and soybeans are produced in this belt that runs from North Dakota down through Iowa, Illinois, and into Ohio. And on the global scale, on any given year, about 26% of the world's corn come from this region and 23% of the world's soybeans. So hugely productive and a feat in and of itself. But this also comes at somewhat of a cost. With this agriculture in the Midwest tends to be uh, a monoculture, largely corn and soybeans, and these systems require a lot of inputs and have really changed the landscape. So they require a decent amount of fertilizer inputs and herbicides and pesticides. Also, we see fossil fuels used for production, transportation, both in crops and fertilizer. And I have this chart from Todd Bokenschutz at the Iowa DNR, kind of showing us trends in Iowa habitat and total habitat loss stemming from agricultural changes. And since 1990, by Todd's calculation, Iowa's lost about 2,600 square miles of wildlife habitat due to less acres being in hay, small grains, and CRP, and moving those into row crops. And in Iowa too, just for an example, Iowa's state area is 35 million acres, and over 30 million of that is in agricultural production. So we see habitat loss, some biodiversity loss, sometimes soil erosion and water quality impairment, um, in combination with this incredibly productive agricultural system. So here in the United States, traditionally, conservation practices on a voluntary scale have been seen as a solution to issues related to agriculture, environmental issues. In 1937, the Soil Conservation Service was started, and I love this wonderful quote. The wastage of soil and moisture resources on farm, grazing, and forest lands is a menace to the national welfare. That was at the inception of the Soil Conservation Service, which later became the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And today their mission is stated on their website as we deliver conservation solutions so agricultural producers can protect natural resources and feed a growing world. And so these are a voluntary legacy, and this continues today. And so today, though, the landscape needs more conservation practice adoption to meet the challenges that we're seeing. This is documented across a wide range of scholars and states, both that to meet the goals that we have, and also conservation disadoption is something of a critical factor. And there was an excellent Iowa Learning Farm seminar on July 2nd, given by Dr. Alejandro Plastina, and about conservation disadoption, the role that that's playing on the landscape. Also, go Tigers. Dr. Plastina is at Mizzou, and I grew up a Mizzou fan. I promise everything else from here will be Iowa State focused. So thanks for bearing with me. So, but to stay with this point, disadoption of conservation practices, even when they reach the landscape, is something of a problem. This is happening. So one conservation practice in particular that meets a lot of these water quality and ecological goals is prairie strips. And as Dr. Helmer said, he's played a role in this. This is a lot of this research has been done at Iowa State University. And so this is where strips of native grasses or forbs are planted on the contour of a field or on the perimeter. And they did some amazing work capturing how beautiful these practices, these prairie strips can be. And some amazing ecological research showing that if 10% of a crop field is strategically converted to prairie, you can reduce soil erosion and nutrient runoff drastically by sometimes 80, 85% when you're looking at nitrogen or phosphorus, and also increase water absorption and biodiversity. And these strips of prairie also provide wildlife habitat and lead to climate change resiliency. Prairie strips were approved as a conservation reserve program practice, CP43, in 2019. So this is a really effective a do-it-all practice in a lot of ways. So from here, I wanted to talk to people who have maintained this practice for at least 3 years to understand their experiences with this practice. And some of those led to conversations about emotional connections to the land and some really deep and personal and vulnerable conversations. People are really passionate about taking care of their farmland and doing that with prairie strips. And as I was having some of those conversations, it came up a couple of times, and I'll talk on the next slide about sense of place. I'm connected to this land. I care deeply about this place. And so is sense of place a helpful framework for understanding people's connections to their prairie strips and their farmland? Really quickly, what is sense of place? This is maybe a new concept for some people. This is essentially just how and why do people and groups develop emotional, social, cultural, and sometimes spiritual connections with specific locations. How does a space become a place that has meaning to someone? This framework originally started with, or is kind of based out of amenity-based landscapes, where scenic or recreational or culturally valued landscapes such as mountains or coasts, often a source associated with tourism or leisure. And so, oh, jumping back here. And so that's where this framework really started, but it has been, scholars have been using this to better understand conservation practice adoption in the context of agricultural working lands. I've got a lot of scholars there that I've been looking at and that use this framework well. And so sense of place is often broken down into subdimensions, and I'll be talking about three of those today. Place attachment, which is essentially the emotional connections to a place, and place identity, how a place contributes to a person's identity or heritage, or does a person use this place to define themselves? And place dependency, how is a place dependent on for functional goals? And that's a really clear one for working landscapes. In a lot of ways, farmers depend on this landscape for their livelihood. That's an example of that. So what did I do and who did I talk to? I talked to Prairie Strip's collaborators. And so I highlighted these farmer and landowner categories. I was able to conduct 16 interviews with, 16 interviews. And on one of those interviews, a land manager also joined the conversation. And so I could talk a really long time about how I coded these as a sociologist, but that puts people to sleep. And so I'm not going to talk about that here today. But if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk about it. And so in these interviews, I asked people about their motivations, their initial motivations, what challenges they've faced as they've been maintaining prairie strips. What have neighbors told you? What have neighbor perceptions been? And also, have you thought about discontinuing your prairie strips? So I had some really wide-ranging and fantastic conversations. And so from here, I'm gonna provide a lot of quotes because Matt, I've got 88 slides and only 75 minutes to get through them. So that's a joke. In my mind, a lot of people are laughing right now.
Don't do that one to me, Derek. You know, like I'm like, how do I?
Got him. So yeah, these next several slides are going to be featuring a lot of quotes from farmers and landowners. And so first up is a slide about these deeper emotional connections, because it became really apparent to me that these prairie strips were adopted by these people because they want to take good care of their land, but they definitely seem to generate new connections or really strengthen this care, these connections that they have for their land. So the first quote was from a farmer. Actually, all three of these quotes are from farmers. First one, I'm protecting things that have been here for thousands of years, that are making sure they're still here, that it carries forward. I think that part of the field where I have them, the prairie strips, probably there would be more soil loss if I didn't have them there. Another farmer said, there's an emotional aspect to it that you get the feeling you're doing something right. And I'm very happy about that. I didn't want my farm to be all caught up and running down the hill, and the prairie strips stopped all the erosion, this one spot. Another farmer said, sometimes farmers farm the same piece of ground for so long, and they love that ground, but they also know that production agriculture is sometimes at odds with what Mother Nature really wants. I feel like prairie strips are kind of like, I don't know, an homage, a sort of an acknowledgement that we don't have to farm in that fence row to fence row mentality. So these are all farmers, and I'll have quotes from landowners in just a minute. But definitely like a deeper sense of taking care of the land, and we've seen through Dr. Arbuckle's work that land stewardship is actually a really high priority for farmers across the ideological spectrum. That's something that's definitely going on here and being strengthened by prairie strips, I think. So another initial motivation for prairie strips was providing habitat, both for invertebrates and vertebrates. And I feel like this quote here tells us, like, this is more than just, yes, we have bugs now. As one landowner told me about a time they were out there with their wife. I was just standing out there by the prairie. I was stunned by the symphony of insects. it was a quiet day and the buzzing was just deafening a lot. My wife was like, "Oh my God, this is why we plant this stuff. This is amazing for the beneficial insects, right?" And this sentiment was described to me a couple different times, often in contrast with quiet corn and soybean fields. And so another sentiment that I encountered several times in these interviews with landowners and farmers was this idea of my neighbors probably think I'm crazy for doing this. And one farmer said, "Well, my neighbors may think, what's he doing out there?" And a landowner told me, "I assume my neighbors think I'm an idiot and talk about me in strange terms." And another farmer mentioned, "Everybody probably thinks I'm crazy for doing it, taking that land out of production to raise what they think looks like weeds." And so there was this kind of like internal perception of people think I'm crazy for doing these prairie strips. And then I was able to ask kind of directly, what have neighbors told you uh, about your prairie strips? Or asking some follow-ups like, "Oh, what have people said that make you think that they think you're crazy?" And nobody had anything in these 16 conversations I had. There were a couple, several people actually. One of the most powerful sentiments I got was how much the community and their neighbors really embrace these prairie strips and love them. And this was something that really surprised a lot of landowners and farmers who had them on their land. How much, how many compliments they received. This word compliment, they were complimented a lot. One farmer said, "We were down there this fall, and one of the neighbors stopped by and was just gushing about how he loved the prairie strips." So this is another thing I want to point out. The flowers and the prairie strips are in my conversations were appreciated by both men and women, um, which surprised me a little bit. Another landowner mentioned, "Well, I have one neighbor across the road who has an acreage, and she thinks the prairie is terrific." And another farmer talked about a time we did have a neighbor that had their engagement pictures taken, and we had just met her. So several stories of people taking engagement photos or kids or grandkids wanting to take their prom photos out by the prairie strips. So there was some real community involvement, some social dimensions to these prairie strips and experiences with them. And another thing that surprised me a little bit was how many times farm management companies came up in their experiences with prairie strips. And in these conversations that I had, it was always in a positive light. And so these are landowners here. The farm management company is someone who kind of connects a landowner to a farmer and handles a lot of that go-between. And one landowner told me, "I have a farm manager because I'm not sure I could have pulled this off, installing and implementing prairie strips and maintaining them without a farm manager, without his expertise, without him there on the ground." Another landowner mentioned how they've been working with a farm management company for a long time, and that's played a huge role in their relationship with their farm and getting this conservation practice out there. Mother didn't remarry at that time. She did much later, but she managed the farm, finding an operator, renting it out. And she hired this farm management company about 50 years ago. They've helped be an intermediary with the operator. And at the time, that was really important. It was so easy for a single woman to be taken advantage of. And another landowner told me, quite frankly, "So Derek, we wouldn't be here without this farm management company as far as conversing about sustainable agriculture. We were really blessed with getting introduced to this farm management company and starting management back in the 90s, and it's going well." So several people articulated that uh, farm management companies were vital in getting prairie strips onto their land. So kind of winding down here, I'm looking forward to some questions. So please drop those questions in the chat. I love conversing about this, and I'm by no means the expert. These landowners and farmers are the experts, and I'm just doing my best to shine a light on their experiences. And yeah, the example that they are. So one last thing that I asked about, the last slide that I'll talk about using quotes, was experiences. Have you considered discontinuing or disadapting your prairie strips? And overwhelmingly, this was something people did not want or didn't think they couldn't even conceive of why they would do that in a lot of ways. One farmer told me, no, I'll just leave it at that. He didn't want to just didn't even think it needed to be discussed. Another farmer said, no, I definitely would not do that. They provide my operation with too many benefits. That's some paraphrase there, but that's what he was getting at. And it would be a sad day if I lost my prairie strips. Another rather spicy landowner told me succinctly, when I asked her, would you ever consider disadopting or discontinuing prairie strips? She said, no, over my dead body. And a few people had considered it though. And so one landowner said, no, I wouldn't continue. I don't plan on discontinuing my prairie strips. I've thought about what happens when the 10 or 15-year contract runs out, but I haven't pursued what happens then. And I paraphrase here, they're starting to consider conservation easements or what things could be like once their CRP contract ran out. And other people were also, who have this as a CRP practice, were thinking about, okay, well, maybe I'm not sure yet. I don't want to discontinue them, but the CRP payment does play a pretty big role for some of these individuals, but not everyone. So some last kind of thoughts here, some final thoughts, going back to sense of place. I was hoping in some ways that the interviews and the concepts that came up there, the themes that came from these interviews would kind of go quite tidily into place attachment, place dependency, or place identity, to use this framework and really cleanly going forward. And that was not the case. These seem to be some very much overlapping concepts. And I've got kind of listed on the slide some examples of like how this is kind of all seems to be all one concept or at the moment. People are attached to their farmlands. They love it. It's a lot of times where they grew up or they have a lot of sentimental attachments to that. And they also identify as land stewards. They have a very deep desire or even like an ethical obligation to take care of that land. And one way to take care of that land is to put conservation practices out there to preserve it, to reduce soil erosion risks, increase biodiversity. And people, so in some ways, they see some functionality here where people kind of depend on their prairie strips to achieve these functional goals, which are rooted in their identity. So that's messy. That was not nearly as clean as I would hope. And as a good scholar, able to pivot there and think, oh, there's a need there to maybe reconceptualize sense of place, especially in the context of working lands, where this is kind of this framework originated with some amenity-based landscapes in mind, and maybe we need to reconceptualize that in the context of working farmland, because there's definitely some deep meaning and deep attachment to farmland, and a deep sense of care for that is playing a role in prairie strips adoption and being enhanced by prairie strips adoption. So some other final thoughts about prairie strip experiences, and I've articulated this a little bit, just wanted to state it pretty clearly here, that there are definitely primary motivations were coming from land stewardship. People wanted to adopt prairie strips because of their soil erosion benefits, keeping water in place, providing habitat to wildlife. But I thought it was very clear, or it seemed apparent to me through these conversations that this connection to the land was strengthened, and new connections, new reasons to love their land were generated because of these prairie strips. Whether that's, I didn't even talk in this presentation about the aesthetics, but aesthetics are a major role. People just love them for how beautiful they are, and oftentimes surprised by how beautiful they are, even from one season to the next, as different prairie species express themselves in maybe a wet summer or a dry summer. And so there's definitely like a reinforcement of this land stewardship ethic, and I feel like new connections being forged through these prairie strips, and maintaining them over time. And I think a large takeaway, and Iowa Learning Farms kind of plug this in the email, but that I think conservation practices that develop and cultivate similar connections would likely reduce the risk of conservation disadoption, which is, as Dr. Plastina pointed out earlier this month, if we can get practices on the landscape, it's really important to keep them there. And so thank you so much for listening. I've been told by Neil Hamilton to always try to finish your presentations with kids or puppies. And so these are my two little ones, it's Finn and Nora, and we're all trying to take care of this state and this region for the future, for our kids, for future farmers. And so special thanks to so many people, Dr. Arbuckle, Dr. Betty Wells, and Lisa Schulte Moore, and Dr. Dorius and Dr. John Tyndall. Tim Youngquist and the Strips team have been instrumental over and over again in helping me connect with these people and help me understand what prairie strips are. And also also Dr. Priscilla Riggle from Truman State's been very helpful, instrumental in getting this presentation developed. And last but not least, the amazing farmers and landowners who were willing to give me some time and energy in participating in interviews, and to also go to some incredible efforts to take good care of their farmland. So that's all I've got, Matt. Hopefully some people have some good questions.
We got lots of questions. Lots of good questions, Derek. And I'm going to kind of amplify one thing. Thank you to the farmers and landowners. We have some on today, I saw. So it's great to see you virtually. I wish I was seeing your smiling face. There was also a question about kind of what are some of the numbers out there for, are people still interested in prairie strips and so forth? And Tim Youngquist forwarded the CRP information by the numbers, and you can see prairie strips. There's still a lot of interest in there, a lot of interest in increased implementation. Okay, with that, let's go to the logistical slides, and then we'll try to get to the questions. Let's go next. Oops. Okay, if you watch this webinar live and are wanting to earn a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu. Let's go to the next slide. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographics survey, we'd greatly appreciate it from the Iowa Learning Farms group. Only one survey response is needed for all 2025 webinars. So if you've done so, thank you so very much. And if not, you can scan that QR code and go there. Let's go to the next slide, which should be a plug for, okay, we're shifting gears. We're gonna go to corn, earworm challenges and sweet corn. So quite a divergence from Derek's work, but we have Ashley Dean, Extension Specialist and Field Crop Entomology, to talk next week. Let's go to the next slide, which should just be, if you watch this webinar live and know somebody else that might benefit from it, please let them know that it's archived. It'll be on the Iowa Learning Farms site or on our YouTube channel, Iowa Learning Farms webinars. All of them are archived there, so you can go back and watch to your heart's content. Okay, there are, let's kind of go here and look at some of the, there was a question, did you, or how many organic farmers do you know were in your pool?
In my pool, there was one organic producer.
Okay. I think that one person brought up kind of sometimes that, common language is important, and some may not share that. This person brought up the problem with the land stewardship ideology that goes across all spectrum of farmers is that it is all about how they interpret stewardship. Guys who are doing full tillage will say they want to leave the farm in better shape for future generations, and but we may not always share a common language about stewardship. And I think we've definitely seen that with some of our efforts. Just okay, let me go down here. Sorry. Um, ah, there was one person asked a clarifying question here. Is it fair to say that prairie strip adopters assume their neighbors looked at them in a negative light for having the strips, but interviews of the neighbors showed the opposite?
To elaborate a little bit more on that, like
Yep,
I didn't personally talk
yep.
to any of the neighbors, but several of these farmers and landowners were like they felt weird about planting these species that oftentimes like milkweed is if that's been a weed target species um in cornfields, and so they feel I think sometimes feel weird planting that next to their crop fields. And so then they're like, yeah, people probably think I'm crazy. And then when I would follow up and ask, like, okay, Mr. Farmer, what have people said that make you think you're crazy? Or that what have people said that have made you think that your neighbors probably don't like it? And I nothing, no negative comments people could come up with. But then later when I asked, and sometimes that would lead to the question of like, oh, what do your neighbors think? And they're like, well, or actually the question was a little bit more open-ended, like, what have people told you about your strips? So like really open-ended to uh, positive or negative comments, and people are always like over and over again, oh, well, this person complimented them, or this person several times, like, oh yeah, I get compliments on them all the time, or people have said they love seeing the wildlife that's out there, or something we didn't touch on here, but oh yeah, and my neighbor and his son now come out and go pheasant hunting out there. Um, so that was kind of where that dialogue. It would be interesting to interview some neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, that would be kind of interesting to see how they view it. Uh, the next question, this individual indicated that they appreciated the observation of PAT, PID, PDE being overlapping construct. You mentioned in your introductory remarks that sense of place can also show up as an almost spiritual construct. Do you see this spiritual context of sense of place connected more with PAT, PID, and or PDE?
Ooh, getting heady there. I like that. In some ways, I mean, if I had to pick one of those, actually, I think it kind of illustrates like a spiritual component. I think is one of those that really points to how much those things still overlap. Like what comes to mind is like one farmer who mentioned, he's like, honestly, when I'm having a bad day, I go out there and walk in the prairie strips, and it just helps me. It just so in some way I'm getting some spirituality. I would consider that spirituality or mental well-being, or sometimes the spirituality aspect comes in the form of this land stewardship. A lot of people are like, well, sometimes in the interviews, people would bring in their religion or their ethical obligations of like, God has made me like I have been blessed with this land to be the steward of it for a short time. It was here before me, it's going to be here after me. And so very much still, I think hard to separate like their identity, their spiritual identity from being really attached to farmland, for example, or a farm that's been in their family for generations, or also this idea of maybe like a conservation heritage has come up a lot too. Like, oh, it's always been, my family has always tried really hard and try different conservation practices. And so there's like a conservation heritage there that also kind of seems to bleed into some spirituality. So that's a great question. I think there's a lot of room for understanding what spirituality means in this conversation.
Okay. So there are a couple here that are I think related. Any thoughts on how conservation professionals could help stimulate that sense of place as we work to increase adoption and continuance of prairie strips?
That's an amazing question and something I think about a lot. I do think practices that have like several different benefits, like several different layers of benefits, where you're seeing, like in the case of, I think this is one reason Prairie Strips seems to do this. Whereas when I was even talking about with other farmers, like, do other, they didn't have this same connection with other conservation practices, whether they had maybe some windrows or uh, grass waterways or cover crops. I think because like it's something else that you can really see when you see wildlife really, I think conservation practices that promote wildlife also that are really pretty. Like these grasses and flowers are just beautiful in ways that even conservation practices that maybe are really good for the soil don't have the same aesthetic appeal. And so I think, I hope am I answering the question there, Matt? Like I
Yeah.
think there's a these conservation practices that do a lot of different things. And even
Uh,
somebody asked, oh, sorry, you
No,
go.
it does. When you think about the habitat, it makes me think about, I think some of the work Jackie Comito's done where they've, when they include something about habitat with some of these practices, all of a sudden there's some greater interest. And I think maybe there was some research out of California, kind of the same. So really does maybe play into it more than some technical person like myself might. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. The one
And I
person.
just
Oh, go ahead.
adding to, really quickly to add to that, I saw somebody in the chat had asked if
Yeah.
they thought, do I think the perenniality of the prairie strips in contributes to increased sense of place connection? I do think that. I know that perennial ground cover adds challenges taking things out of production, but I do think that that stays on there for multiple years throughout the whole year, and it's some. I think that does is a major factor.
Yeah. Um, there are some here on how prairie strips impact field work and certainly, might increase it a bit, and there would definitely be some management and so forth with it. Um, One of our landowners indicated that they received more positive comments or feedback from non-farmers and maybe city folks. Neighboring farmers rarely say anything positive or negative. And this individual wondered if that was mentioned by any other interviewees.
Yeah, a few people also did mention, honestly, my actually, this gets to something. So a couple of people mentioned, actually, my neighbors haven't really said anything. So this is where it's sometimes like, maybe my neighbors geographically haven't said anything, but other people from town, or I have gotten these other compliments. Another person mentioned, and this stuck with me and haunts me a little bit. They said neighbors. What neighbors? I don't have neighbors anymore. And it really pointed to like, oh, yeah, there aren't people living on the
Mhm.
farms next to them like there used to be. So,
And another landowner said that they view this individual says that prairie strips are one of their crops. Um,
hmm.
oh, there was one. And I don't know if, you probably didn't capture any information about this, but and somebody else asked, did you observe a difference in how happy farmers were with the strips relative to how easy or complex the design was in the field?
Yeah, several farmers, I think this gets to, I don't know if I can answer it quite that cleanly, but several farmers did value strips because they could turn equipment around in them or drive through them, and they could handle it.
Yeah.
Both like surviving, and that the Matt, you and other people might know better, but that is as CP43, you can drive through it. And that
Mhm.
was mentioned several times of like, oh, that's why this is that's one reason I really like this, as opposed to maybe a terrace or some other, or even CP42. I don't think you're allowed to do that. So that there were several farmers did mention how this, I both like being able to drive equipment through it, and I'm trying to sometimes even beneficial insects. They feel like they do see less, some different insect pressure um, in their fields around the strips. That wasn't everybody that mentioned that, but that did come up a little bit. So their compatibility with the farm and farm equipment did come up several times.
Did there any questions with them or discussion about their management, whether they're using burning or so forth?
Yeah, that came up quite a bit because
Okay.
uh but not as like a burden as or as like a major barrier. Most of the time it was like actually the maintenance, maybe the maintenance was pretty intensive those first couple of years to get them established, like a lot of mowing. But this is also where the farm management companies came in a little bit. Is like, oh, they were help the farm management companies in the conversations where they came up were coordinating and taking care of the prairie strip maintenance, whether that was burning it themselves or contracting that burnout. Some honestly, a lot of farmers, I think, really enjoy the burn, or a
Okay.
lot of
Yeah.
landowners and
What,
farmers also
right.
enjoy that part.
That's what I was going to say. Don't a lot of us like fire, like that, that's part of it. So, um,
Yeah,
yeah. Um,
especially.
were any of them grazing their strips that you?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think so, but a couple people did mention they were gonna try, they wanted to
Okay.
start doing that. I don't
Okay.
think off the top of my head anybody was doing that yet, but at least two people mentioned that they were hoping or even had plans in the works to get some grazing out there in the future. But I do think that's something I don't really know much about, is the potential for grazing. And
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, a really cool
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. I think that that kind of gets at most of the questions here. Some of the others were a little bit more maybe outside of your area, but kind of a reminder that maybe we'll have to get Tim or somebody else on the management of these strips, prairie
Yeah.
strips back on. So again, if folks need uh, if folks need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, um, ALENAW at istate.edu. And Tim, I'm going to put this, Elena, Tim's always around to do a webinar. So we're going to,
I
oh,
know, I wish I had
we
Tim with
have,
me every
wait just a
time.
second. We're going to be, and I want to put a plug in for this. We're going to have a virtual field day on prairies in the winter. And so Carl Kurtz, thanks to um, Lisa Schulte Moore, uh, getting in contact with Jackie from the Learning Farms. And Jackie and Nathan went out and got some footage talking to Carl and his prairie, which Jackie said was just beautiful when they were out there. So I want to people on here are probably many are at least have an appreciation for the prairie. And so please be on the lookout for that because I'm super excited for that myself. Um, and one of the landowners did indicate they started grazing on their strips since they've converted from farm to 100% grass-fed, grass-finished livestock. So they are um, grazing their strips. So Derek, thank you so much for your work on this and sharing it with the group today. And again, if you need a CCA CEU, email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iState.edu. And with that, please tune in next week if you're interested in um, uh, more entomological talk from Ashley Dean. So with that, everybody have a great day.